Welcome back. You're still watching Finweek Money Matters. Mining, it's a cyclical business, and the last 3 years have been tough. We've seen austerity cuts, write-downs, retrenchments, refinancing, new CEOs, and many promises of better things to come. If we look at the warnings from companies like Glencore and Anglo American in January 2015, it won't be any easier. But in studio with us to help us discuss this outlook and make sense of all of this, we've got Lloyd Christie, Director of Mining at ENS Africa, and Peter Leon, Partner at Webber Wentzel. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. And of course, Yana Marais is still with us. Let me start with you, Peter. What is the one thing that is keeping your clients awake at night when it comes to the mining industry? What is the biggest concern?
Well, obviously in the South African context, it's regulatory uncertainty, but in a global context, it's access to capital. That's the biggest constraint on the mining industry at the moment, given the uncertainty in global commodity markets, concerns about China, and so on. But I mean, of course, it's a very cyclical business, as you indicated in the introduction. So, some commodity prices started moving up again. That's a good sign. And the question, of course, is, how sustainable it all is.
Lloyd, let me come to you. It is a cyclical business. Commodities, they go up and they go down. So is this still very much a concern for your clients?
I think certainly. I think the one thing that we have to realize is that mining is not for sissies. There's a fair amount of uncertainty in the daily decisions that they take. And I think investment's exactly the same. So the problem is, if once you've made your investment, you would want to know the rules of the game. And I think their concern at the moment is, what are those rules? Because a lot of the law is still a little bit up in the air.
I feel like, since 2008, and I know I've spoken to Peter before about this many times, but regulatory uncertainty has been the issue we've been talking about for years in South Africa. Is this something that we're just never going to get right? What is your view?
Well, I think that there's some, straws or signs in the right direction, Yana, because I think the fact that the President sent this MPRDA amendment bill, the bill to amend the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act back to Parliament, is positive, notwithstanding the Chamber of Mines' reservations about it, because I think it could lead potentially to much better legislation. And I think there's a recognition in government now that this uncertainty, this investor uncertainty, can't be allowed to continue, and it needs to be addressed. So I think you're hearing very strong messages from the government, starting at Davos in January and moving now as we run up to the mining Indaba around that. I think the message has got through to the government, to the cabinet, and to the leadership of the governing party that what's gone on in the past can't continue, and not least because there is so much uncertainty around global commodity markets, and if you have all the regulatory uncertainty in South Africa, it makes it much more difficult.
Lloyd, what tangible outcomes do you want to see come out of the mining Indaba next week? As Peter was saying, we've been speaking about it at Davos. Next week, we have a platform where we can try and air out all these issues. What do you want to see at the end of the week?
Well, I think what the new minister would need to do is to relay a new message. I think I've been to 8 mining Indabas. My concern was always that the minister kept on repeating the same answers to the many myriad of questions that investors pose to her. So we have new blood in the ministry. He, as Peter said, has made some very positive noises. And I think what he would need to do is to dispel investor concern and really chart out a way forward, how he will go about ensuring that firstly he listens to the concerns, so he needs to demonstrate sensitivity towards those concerns, and how will he go about ensuring that those concerns feature in what we ultimately will say as a finalised bill, a finalised amended act. So that's what he would need to demonstrate in order to ensure that investors keep coming to South Africa.
Can I ask, for me, I predict the first big showdown will probably be the outcomes of the mining charter. Sure. When do you think we'll see some answers, and how do you think they will?
To answer your question directly, I mean, the outcome of the audit is supposed to come out at the end of March. Yeah. That was the last indication I heard. But I think you're right. I think that's going to, if you look back at what happened in 2009, when a different set of consultants were doing the mining charter review then at the 5-year period, there was a huge to and fro between the Chamber of Mines and the government on that. And, you know, as to where empowerment was, you might remember there's quite a showdown in Parliament in the Portfolio Committee. But I think that, you know, I hope that doesn't happen again, because it wasn't very positive. But you're right, I think that is a potential area of conflict. And it's really, you know, how do you measure empowerment? And what yardsticks do you use to measure ownership? I think that's one of the things that could come out of the audit. But just to touch on something you raised earlier with Lloyd, I think perhaps the most positive message the Minister and the Department of Mineral Resources could give at the Mining Indaba is a real commitment to stick to what President Zuma promised in State of the Nation last year, this 300-day window for a one-stop license for water, for mining rights, and for environmental permits. You know, Lloyd's area.
Lloyd, you're laughing there. Jump in there.
When I say this with the greatest amount of respect and due deference, but this 300-day story has been beaten to death. Every single year, this story is talked about. In other jurisdictions in Africa, they actually do achieve it. Sure. But the one outlier is that they require significant intervention in the Department of Water Affairs. So it's great that we've got this ostensible one-stop shop, so a mining company can apply for its mining rights and its environmental authorization to one department, but you still require a water use license from another department. And that's really where the problem lies. And there's been an amendment to the National Water Act very recently, but all that it says is that the Minister of Water Affairs needs to think about how to integrate and align the water use license application process with this one-stop shop idea. So, you know, great, very noble in intent, but still scant in detail. So that's still the outlier.
Yeah. No, I agree. Look, I mean, the one thing I've always said to the Department of Mineral Resources, one of the systems they should implement is what you have under the Competition Act, that decisions have to be made within a specified period, normally it's 60 days. Decisions not made, it's deemed to be granted. And of course, that didn't find very much favour with them. But you really need to have a system where regulators operate more efficiently and they're held to account in terms of time periods. And that's the problem with the amendment bill, because the few specified time periods you had in the Act have all been taken out of the Act and been put into regulations. And that is problematic in terms of best practice and good governance, I think.
Out of interest, how long does it take to get all your paperwork in order at the moment?
Nothing short of 2 years. It's unpredictable. Because
nothing short of 2 years.
What they have said, though, Jana, is that the department again in December put out a notice saying that they more or less guarantee, one has to see whether that happens, the prospecting rights be granted in 6 months and mining rights within 1 year, or less, slightly less than that. You know, proof of the pudding is in the eating.
The one thing that no one actually deals with, it's great to have these rights granted, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have security of tenure. And let me just give an example. They always talk of these turf wars. So what we've managed to achieve is to have the Minister of Environmental Affairs relinquish some of our powers to the Minister of Mineral Resources in the granting of these rights. But you know, what we don't talk about is what the Minister of Environmental Affairs have reserved for herself. And that's, she is still the appeal authority.
Well, so that was a compromise between the two departments. It's not a very good one.
Exactly.
Because, you know, you have one department, and also the Minister of Mineral Resources under the amendments becomes the environmental authority, but the appeal authority, as Lloyd says, is to another ministry. But the Minister of Mineral Resources is not going to apply the MPRDA, the mining code, to that. He's going to apply the National Environmental Management Act to those decisions. So it's a very mixed up, convoluted system, and you know, it was a political compromise in 2008. I don't know how it's going to work out. We have to see.
So we've highlighted all things that we're just not getting right. What have we done right in terms of regulations that has helped the mining industry?
Well, I think, so on the one hand, let me say that the Charter, for example, great policy document. not law. Completely two different things. But what we can say about the Charter is that it is, again, a noble attempt to ensure that mineral resources are exploited to the benefit of the nation. It's quite another thing if government wants to regulate by policy as opposed to law. And so part of this debate about the bill is elevating the status of the mining charter to national legislation.
Which actually the President sent back to Parliament.
Because
that was one of the reservations he had, that you couldn't actually elevate the mining charter. It's actually something I argued as well, that you can't make the mining charter and the codes of good practice part of a statute, because as Lloyd indicates, say that it's not legislation, it's more policy. But in the amendment bill, they actually said that the mining charter and all these other instruments would suddenly become part of the statute. And interestingly enough, in the President's referral back to Parliament, he said, well, he has some doubt about that, whether or not that's constitutionally permissible. So now the Portfolio Committee is going to have to grapple with that, amongst other issues, international trade law and various other things. So I think they need some good legal advice on these issues.
Jana, do you want to
Well, I just think it's a great environment for lawyers. And I think
If there's one thing that South Africa does well, it's prolific in legislating. So yes,
Implementation's a little weaker.
Jana mentioned this is a great environment for lawyers. I was reading an article by Christa Buertes, and he mentions some of the top 5 sectors for entrepreneurs to capitalize on. So he talks about education, and one of the things that was there was mining. I want to hear from the two of you gentlemen. Let me start with you, Peter. Looking at entrepreneurship and then putting that together with mining, is that still an area where you think people can still thrive, given all of these
Look,
things?
I think it's difficult, but I think the one that you asked us earlier what you thought government's achievements were around mining law, mineral law reform. And I would say to you, I know it's very constrained now by the situation in the global commodity markets, but one of the things that changed the law made, the most positive, I've always thought, move, other than around bringing black ownership into the industry in 2004, but one of the best things that the MPRDA did, the mining code did, was to create a junior mining sector, which South Africa never had before, because the new mining code in 2004 introduced the use it or lose it principle. Mining companies before that, the big mining houses, just could sterilize their assets. They never had to use them. So basically the law is now, many other countries follow this, use it or lose it. If you don't use the asset, you won't be able to keep it. So I think that's important.
I'm going to stop you there. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get your thoughts, Lloyd, but that means we'll just have to get you back again to continue this conversation. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to Lloyd Christie, he's the Director of Mining at ENS Africa, and Peter Leon, partner at Webber Wentzel, and of course, Jana from Finweek. She's the editor of Finweek there.